Welcome to the Making of Me podcast, where we explore the defining moments that shape extraordinary people into who they have become. Our today's guest is Granger, a full-time volunteer minister, content creator, podcast host, and self-published author of over 24 books, husband, and father of three. Paul did not arrive at ministry through a single dramatic moment. He arrived through the slow, humbling work of letting go of what he thought life was supposed to look like and learning to stand and step no matter how life actually is. For over 2 decades, he has been cultivating authentic, accessible space where people can wrestle with the hard question of faith and life through content, conversation, and community. His podcast is called Where Did You See God? And the question itself says everything about how he moved through the world. Paul, it's a pleasure and honor to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. So, Paul, before ministry, before the podcast and the book, who were you and what did you believe life was supposed to look like before life started showing you otherwise?
Yeah. I think often about how we all grow up in a specific context, and depending on that context, it can shape our understanding of what life is, right? We put another way, we all grow up in these bubbles. And I grew up in a bubble that was a small rural community. Everybody lived with a lot of woods around them, and most people identified as Christian. And so that's what I thought life was, is quiet, calm, Christian, and had very little understanding of reality outside of that, beyond what I might see on TV or on a movie. And, I also knew that you're supposed to go to school and then get a job and then get married and have kids and live your life. And then at some point you die. And that's what life was. It was in middle school when there was this moment where I felt kind of accosted by this question of, what does it actually mean to be a Christian? What does it actually mean to believe in God? Because it was just a given. It was just how life was. But something in me really pressed me to say, if this is what we're saying it is, it should actually matter pretty significantly in life. It should actually impact my life significantly. And I'm a middle schooler, so I'm wrestling with these deep life questions. And yet it was this beautiful moment of really considering, how open am I to, if I say that I believe in this God, letting this God actually have my life? Because if I believe that he is who I say he is, then he created my life. He already owns it. And so do I want to hold it for myself and shape it as I want to shape it? Or am I willing to be open to letting him do what he wants to do with it? And there's something in me that was open to it. And immediately I had this sense that my life was going to be shaped around ministry. And I hesitate saying that because even how we understand that word is very defined in our minds. But it wasn't like going into ministry, working into ministry, although that was a part of how my mind understood it. But it wasn't even that. It was that my life would be committed to what it meant to love God and love others. Now, at that time, I didn't know what that meant. I've spent the last several decades trying to understand what that means, and I will spend the next many, many decades still trying to understand what that means. But what ultimately happened is my life went from, here is the blueprint of what life is and how it's supposed to work, to, there is no blueprint other than to seek first the kingdom of God's righteousness and trust that he will set whatever path straight from there. And the last several decades have definitely demonstrated that God's ways are not my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts. And though he is definitely a better guide than I would have ever been for myself.
Amazing. Yeah, he's definitely a better guide than you would have been for yourself. That's really good to me. And it's really lovely too, especially when you start battling with the word ministry. Is it going to be more like going to pulpit and having to hold a microphone? And your definition of it earlier on, and the fact that, it was more of loving him and loving others. Yeah, it's really amazing. And you spent over 2 decades at ministry without a traditional paycheck. What did choosing that particular path require of you to surrender? And what did you find on the other side of the surrender?
Yeah. My income journey has looked very untraditional most of my life. And, it started when I was graduating from college and I knew what I was supposed to do. Again, the traditional path is after you go to college so you could get a job. And then once you graduate college, you get that job and you get a well-paying job so that you can have a comfortable life. And God, again, disrupted things. As I was about to graduate, he really pressed me to pray into not what I was supposed to do, but listen for what he was inviting me to do. What he was inviting me to do was the opposite of what I would have expected. It was to lean into, to put it succinctly, urban youth ministry. And I had very little experience with ministry. Didn't necessarily feel drawn to working with kids, but the urban part, I grew up in the country. I didn't want to live in the city. I didn't want to live in a highly densely populated area. And so I knew it must have been God because it wouldn't have been my plan. And what was interesting is he wasn't inviting me to that for a vocational reason, but was inviting me to experience what it meant to really love your neighbors. Because the space where I landed, Urban Promise Wilmington, it was a body of people who they weren't there for paychecks because they weren't making much. They weren't there for acclaim because they weren't getting that. They were there because they actually wanted to love God and love others. And seeing that not just in action, but lived out
Yeah.
authentically, utterly changed how I understood all of it. Understood God, understood love. But stepping into that space, I was an intern and I made, I think it was $75 every 2 weeks, and I had a $50 a month food budget. And housing was provided, but housing took many different forms, including for one period of time, a mattress on a floor where there was non-functional stove, occasional mice,
Yeah.
no washer and dryer. And so the payment element of that was not a big factor for those 2 years. And it allowed me to live into what it looked like to spend my life not on having money to spend,
Yeah.
but on expending myself for God and others. And that set me up well for what the rest of my life would look like, because in that time I've worked in different spaces. I spent a year working at a group home where I did have a traditional paycheck, worked at a boys and girls club where I did as well, but in both those jobs, not making what my peers were making, anywhere close to what my peers were making. Worked for a ministry where I had to raise support. But where I've been the last since 2018 is no paycheck.
Oh.
It is God's provision. There are friends and family who come alongside me and support, but that does not fill the gap of what it's supposed to fill up. Because even if you do support raising, you're supposed to map out your expenses and then say, well, this is how much money I have to raise. But this is what God pressed me in. Coming into 2018, I was unjustly fired from a job. Whole other story. But God invited me to not operate out of financial fear because at the time, wife, 2 kids, a baby on the way, mortgage, other payments that I had to make. People expressly told me, you need to be responsible and get a new job immediately because this is what you have to do. And God said, don't operate out of financial fear.
Mm.
He was really inviting me to press into a core belief that we say we believe, as Christians say they believe, but don't always live out. It's that we don't need money, we need God. God is provider. And we'll say that in church, we'll sing it, but then the rest of the week we live as though we need money. And this is why Jesus expressly says you can't serve both God and money. But man, oh man, do we really give money so much power over our lives, even if we don't consider ourselves greedy. We're afraid if we don't have enough, then life is going to fall apart. And so since 2018, I've had to really live into what it means to trust God as provider. And he has shown up. There are big ways that I've seen him show up that were phenomenally unexpected. Like we live in a 1905 old house that had these windows that were drafty and leaked and were costing us so much money in power bills, and all of those got replaced at no cost to us. Like, that was huge. That was a huge God gift. There were times where it was very clearly God, like we had this expense. We did not have the funds for it. We said, all right, well, let's just take the next week to pray. And then somebody unexpectedly gave us the amount that we needed. Like, that just happened last week. But there's other moments where I can't tell you what happened or how it happened. I just saw that our bank account was supposed to be, dry, and it wasn't. And I'm like, I don't know how. I don't know how there's still money here. And so, over the years, I've lived in a society, especially in American society, money is just huge. And the expectation that the man is supposed to be the breadwinner and,
Yeah.
all these things you're supposed to have. I have existed in these cultures, and God's been inviting me to operate in ways that are countercultural. And that can be incredibly hard when God
Yeah.
invites you to be different. My goodness, look at scripture. John the Baptist, Elijah, others who had to be different in a world that could not and would not understand them. And they had to choose for God to be enough, even if they lost all else. Even to the point where you get like Job saying, though he slay me, I will
Yeah,
yet serve him.
it's
Like,
what I
man, what
said.
does it look like to love and honor and serve God at the level that even if it seems like God's turning against you, you're still all in for him? And that's what it has looked like to really have a lifestyle of ministry. So many moments where I had to choose to say, I do not like how God is doing this, but
Yeah,
I'm going to choose to
yeah,
trust him. I wish there was more money in the account, but I'm going to choose to trust him. These people do not only don't understand me, but are accusing me of the opposite, but I'm going to choose to trust him.
mm,
And that's really the main point of all of this is that it's not about vocation. It's not about vocational ministry. We've been invited to give our lives to God, not once, but daily. Paul says, pray without ceasing. It's this continual connection
yeah,
with God that we're invited to, and our jobs and how we live our lives are the subplots of that greater plot.
yeah. Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your heart on this. And also, you make reference of the fact that when you lost your job, you had two babies, two children, alongside one that was oncoming. How did your wife perceive your decision not looking for another job immediately? Did she trust you all
Yeah.
the way? Or how
Yeah,
was it?
that was an interesting part. There's been a few moments where we both knew it must have been God because she had a peace around certain things.
Mm,
Because she knows how life works and she knows how she desires life to work. And her husband not having an income would not have been on her list. And yet God gave her a peace around it. In fact, one of the big things that God did that was really beautiful is when I was in that toxic ministry environment, most of what I experienced, very few if anyone understood or trusted or believed. Even my closest friends who wanted to understand, it was hard. They couldn't see why I was staying in that environment. And I was staying because God was inviting me to stay. And one of the gifts that God gave my wife that did not feel like a gift to her at the time was we actually worked for the same ministry for that last year that I was there. And the same boss and the things that she was never in the room to see that I experienced. There was one day that she experienced it too, that he ended up engaging with her in the same ways he had engaged with me. And it was eye opening for her, which then allowed her, when I was unjustly fired, to actually know that it was unjust, to know that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't deficient, and to be able to stand with me and to support me in that. She's also known me not long enough. She met me when I was in that ministry intern role
yeah,
all those years ago after college. So she knew going into that I was not someone who was chasing after money, that was chasing after a claim. And so when I entered that season of unemployment and God invited me to not operate out of financial fear, which meant not rushing into a job, still doing my due diligence in a faithful way, but trusting God ultimately, she had this peace around it, this trust around it. There are still hard moments. There are still moments where we were like, how is this going to work? We mapped out how much money was in the account and we're like, okay, this is how much longer we have. But the other thing that helped her to be able to trust to stay at the table was moments like what I described earlier where God showed up. I ended up unexpectedly in the hospital for a week. We ended up having car issues. Our cat ended up needing unexpected, like, teeth removal. Christmas fell at this time and our baby being born. So in this span of like 2 months, a phenomenal number of expenses hit. And after a few of them hit, the next week we got 3 unsolicited checks in the mail. I wasn't even support raising at the time, mind you. These are just checks that people sent. We
yeah,
didn't ask for them. And so there were these moments. And then we hit the point where we shouldn't have had money anymore and the account wasn't empty. And so it was another one of those moments where it was like, I don't know how, but somehow God's doing it. That allowed my wife to know that something greater than our understanding was happening. And so when I had a few job offers on the table, and one of them was serving with Youth with a Mission, YWAM, where the positive was my job would be whatever God was inviting me to do.
yeah.
But the caveat was no YWAMers get a paycheck. Every single YWAMer across the globe is a full-time volunteer. I would not be making money. When I made that choice, she was able to had the peace to stand there with me. In fact, let me tell you how it got even crazier. Was going to be doing a 5 to 6 month discipleship training school so that I could fully join staff with YWAM. And normally, if you're part of a family, the whole family does it. But that wasn't my wife's plan. That wasn't her plan for our kids. It was a hard no for her. And then one day I came home and she's like, I feel like God's telling us that the whole family needs to do it. Like it was a complete 180, which meant she had to leave her job. And so for 2 years, neither of us had a traditional paycheck, traditional income coming in. And she had this deep peace that God was inviting her into this season. Some of our family had some questions about that, had some concerns about that. And yet, over time, as they saw God's faithfulness to care for us and our family, that did something for their faith.
Yeah.
That challenged them in their understanding of God and who God is as provider. And so, every day reminds us of how much life is bound to money. Every day you have to pay some bill or buy some food. But that's been the beautiful part of this journey, is seeing actually no. Even though life does involve or can involve money, money is not the point. God has provided in ways without cash exchanging hands, and we've experienced that. And so what does it look like to untether ourselves more and more and more from this false understanding of money and lean more and more on this true understanding of who God is in our life and what he is actually trying to accomplish?
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Yeah, this is really lovely. Just having to how your wife are coming to buy along the vision and yeah, staying together and having this done. It's really amazing. So also you describe a shepherd gift, a particular ability to cultivate rich dialogue and hold space for people in hard places. Where did that gift come from? And how did
Yeah.
life shape it in you rather than crush?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer, where did it come from, was from God. But I can actually look back now in life and see that the reality of that. Because when I was in middle and high school, there's one thing I always noticed, and I didn't understand why it happened. People would open up to me, and not just friends, but
Yeah.
a wide range of different types of people would come to me and see me as a safe space to process things and to talk about things. And I wasn't seeking this out. I didn't necessarily have the passions or gifts in like from myself to do it, but when I was in those spaces, it felt very natural. It felt life-giving. And I always wondered, like, why is it that this is happening? And as life went on and I began leaning in towards what it meant to live a lifestyle of ministry versus just doing ministry, began to see the moments in which I was able to operate in this way, even in the times where I didn't have the desire at all, that didn't have the strength at all, didn't have the connection points or the life experiences. I'll give an example. One of the things that I've done for the last several years is facilitate a community Bible study. And the heart behind that is to create a safe, accessible space for anyone in the community to know they are welcome, to know they can connect and share, and to know that they are loved when they're in that space. And specifically, our community has faced a number of struggles, so much of it because of generational things that have happened against neighbors, ways that the city has designed things that have hurt certain demographics of the community. And what that has led to is a number of neighbors who are experiencing a wide range of hardships, whether it be poverty, whether it be addiction, whether it be loss of loved ones, experiencing violence in their lives, experiencing abuse in their lives. I mean, there's a whole range of things. And what it leads to is a number of neighbors finding themselves in places where they do not feel like they would be welcome in the church, or they've tried to go into the church and have not been welcome. Maybe it's because of their appearance. Maybe it's because they're unhoused and they have not bathed in a while. Maybe it's because they don't feel like they have the education level or the spiritual display that would be welcome in the church. And so they feel like the church has rejected them. Well, we want to create a space in which they can walk in and know they are loved. And not just know they are loved, but they could actually have a voice at the table. Well, what's been interesting is the number of times that God has positioned me in relationships where I have very little shared experience. I haven't not experienced the same types of losses or addictions or, fill in the blank, which would normally make me feel as a human, I'm not the person for this. And that may actually be true on a level if God didn't exist, if the Spirit didn't exist. But Jesus said, I'm going to send a helper and an advocate who's going to give you the words to speak, who's going to give you understanding. And so it's in those moments where I'm like, I'm seeing God work in the conversation and I realize I know this isn't me. Like this,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to do this. I wouldn't have been able to speak words of life in this moment, but it's happening. And so this must be the Spirit working. And so that's how I've known that it is a gift and not just a skill set that I've built. We can have skill sets around creating community and conversation. There's plenty of charismatic people who can make people feel loved, but what God's doing is deeper than that, is greater than that. can happen even if I'm at my worst, right? And one thing that I love about this idea of the shepherding gift is it comes from passage, I want to say it's in Ephesians, maybe Ephesians 4 or 6, one of the two, where it talks about some were called to be apostles, some prophets,
Yeah.
some evangelists, some shepherds, some teachers. And we treat those as normal human gifts like teacher. All right, yeah, we know teachers and they teach stuff. But I've come to understand it in a more robust way. I believe those gifts are actually two-part things. One, it's a unique way that God has positioned us to be able to see, understand, and experience things in reality. And then two, a unique ability to then convey it to others. And so for the teacher, it's not just that they're good at teaching, it's that God allows them to be able to see and
Yeah.
understand things in the world that people are struggling to understand. They get it on some level. For some reason, they get it. And then they somehow have the ability to then communicate that to others in a way that now they become the bridge, right, between this inaccessible knowledge. And you can map this out with the different parts. The evangelist, it's not just that they are charismatic and can stand on a street corner and call, it's that they have a unique ability to see the people that need to hear truth and to be able to then connect with them in a relational way. That's why someone who identifies as an introvert can have the evangelistic gift.
Yeah.
They might say, I hate small talk, but find themselves able to connect with people, not because of them, but because of God in them. And so the shepherding gift is the unique ability to see people who may otherwise be missed, forgotten, misunderstood. Think of Jesus when he sees Zacchaeus up in the tree, right? A lot of people didn't notice him up there, but Jesus had the unique ability to see him and then to connect with him, to walk with him, because that's the shepherding piece. It's not teaching information. It's not the apostolic and pressing someone forward. Shepherding is walking with, walking alongside, the shepherd with the sheep, going through the journey, not trying to fix things, but being present with. And so I know that that's one way that God has invited me to function, is to journey with people. And part of that is through cultivating that space where it is accessible, it is authentic, and people feel loved because they actually are loved.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, those particular gifts, the way you just explained, they just speak volume. Those particular gifts really make reference of it. Our teachers, evangelists, everything for the perfection of the saints and for the work of the ministry. And the fact that, yeah, there's a unique understanding of what the it actually is and the unique ability to convey it to others. Yeah, that's really amazing. So also you have been so you have taken what you call crazy step of faith. What is the step that still surprise you when you think about it, and what made you take it when everything logical says otherwise?
Yeah. There's been a few. You know, the one I described earlier of I could have a traditional job or I could take this job that pays no money. That was a little crazy. The house that I'm in that I mentioned earlier, this old house, was not something we were pursuing, was not something we had the money for.
Yeah.
Was a very foolish endeavor and impossible endeavor because the person who was selling it was listing it for unrealistically high. So even if we had money, it would have been overpriced and it was a non-starter for us. It was a hard no for us, except I was driving home one day and I felt like God was inviting me to detour by it. And as I was in front of the house and felt led to pray, I felt like God was saying, I want to invite you to pursue this house, and I'm not promising you're going to get it. Now that's even more foolish because like we're fine taking a crazy step of faith as long as there's the guarantee that we're going to get
Yeah.
the thing. But man, to do something that risky, that foolish, and not even have it guaranteed, and that is wild. And God had already prepared me for this because when I was in that job and I shared that people were confused why I was staying there and I was staying because God was inviting me to stay, he gave me a similar word.
Yeah.
It was, I want to invite you to stay and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And it's that piece, that word that I'm intentional to use, invite. Sometimes we feel like God is forcing us into things, but sometimes he's just putting an invitation out there.
Yeah.
Ephesians 3:20 says, to him who's able to do immeasurably more than we're asking for or imagining because of the power at work within us. God is trying to do more than we're asking for or imagining. And he puts an invitation of, do you want to trust me in that? Or do you want to settle for what you're asking for or imagining? Do you want that lesser thing? But if you want immeasurably more, then you're going to have to trust me. And my ways and my thoughts are not your ways and thoughts. And so it's going to not just look crazy, it's going to be crazy. And it's probably going to hurt because it's going to cost you everything. But I already own all that. And I'm offering you so much more. And so with this house, it was a long 6-month journey that had so many moments that looked more and more and more impossible. And then these little teeny moments where we saw, well, God's doing something. But there was one point where it seemed like it was all falling apart. And we had not just wasted time, but wasted money, wasted prayers, wasted our faith. And I remember having this moment where I'm in my kitchen. And here's the irony of all this. This other house was just walking like a few blocks away. And it was tall enough over the trees where when the morning sun would hit it, that would be the first thing illuminated. So when I would look out the window in the morning, the house would be glowing while everything else was still dark.
Hmm.
And in the good moments, it's like, it's a sign from God. He's saying he's going to do this. But after this particular moment where everything fell apart, man, that it hurt to see that. It almost felt insulting. Like, God, why
Yeah.
are you putting a spotlight on this thing? And I'm thinking about, what happens if it all falls through? And like the way the guy had done some work in it, like I knew at some point it was going to catch fire because he's just twisting wires together and putting duct tape.
Yeah.
So what if it like burns up before someone can fix it, or some other family moves in and we see them every single day in this house we thought we were supposed to have? And I'm just grumbling as I'm making my breakfast, and felt like God very gently, patiently said to me, what is it you were actually pursuing? Because it seems like instead of pursuing me, you're pursuing the house.
Yeah.
And it cut deep. Because he was right. I thought I had been pursuing him. I mean, I was seeking him and we were praying and we were doing this because he invited us. But at some point, the house became the thing we wanted. And God reminded me, I told you, I'm not promising you're going to get it. This was never about getting a house. So why are you so bent out of shape about not getting this house? And I was like, man, it was so convicting because I had been so authentically spiritual, so authentically seeking God, and yet wasn't seeking God, even as I was seeking him. And so it was a good moment that reoriented me of what it actually means to seek God, even as we're accepting his invitations. And that was the craziest part of this crazy faith thing, is actually realizing we can have faith in what God will do versus actually faith in God.
Yeah.
And so that reorientation changed how we operated for the next few months. And we did end up getting the keys to the house.
Ooh.
We ended up being able to pay for like making it safe to live in, taking care of that wiring issue, some plumbing issues, old floor issues, lead paint in the wall issues, even though we didn't have enough money for it. I still don't know how we paid for it. I really don't. I have a spreadsheet. I'm like, the numbers don't match up. But even though we did get the house, I'm constantly reminded that it was never about the house, and it can never become just about the house. At any point that I get so focused on the blessing that I forget the blesser, then I'm off point. I'm slipping back into just being a mere human with mere human thinking that is just excited for four walls and a roof, when God's like, I could make you sleep outside and still care for you. Like,
Yeah.
all this stuff is just bonus to what you actually need, which is just me. I am all you need. I am enough.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So looking back at the man who had a picture of how life's supposed to go, what are you most grateful for about the way life refused to cooperate because of what it has made?
Yeah, man, there's been a lot of hardships in life. There's been a lot of hardships the last couple of years. There's been a lot of hardships the last month. And in those moments, it can be really easy for me to get really focused on what isn't happening that's supposed to, how things are supposed to be, but they aren't, what I am losing, what I'm supposed to be getting, like all these things. And I have some really honest conversations with God about, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing hardship? I resonate with David in Psalm 13 when he's like, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long will I have sorrow in my heart and my tears will be my food day and night? I might be mixing up other Psalms because David had a lot of Psalms where he saw what life was supposed to be and how it was not only was wrong, but seemed irredeemable. And I think what I appreciate most is that, as I noted, I've had a lot of really hard moments, and now I can look back on those and recognize that I made it through, but also the ramifications of it aren't what I thought they would be. Or put another way, I'm able to look back and see God's faithfulness in sustaining me and in setting me on a path that I didn't see, that I wouldn't have chosen. And I'm trying to be careful in my words because often what we want that to be is how we understand the Job story, where he went through hardship, but in the end, he got everything back. You got to double everything back. And so that's what God's going to do for me. It's going to be a hardship, but in the end, there's going to be this huge blessing. And sometimes that's not what it is, not a tangible blessing. It is a blessing, though, because God is working again on immeasurably more than we're asking for or imagining. God
Yeah.
is accomplishing things not based on the here and now stuff that's going to fade away. Scripture's clear. All this stuff, none of it lasts. He's working on something eternal. And so when he carries us through the hardships, what he's really trying to do is get us to see and understand and celebrate the eternal spiritual blessings that exist. That's
Yeah.
why the disciples, the apostles, were able to joyfully go to their death because they realized, man, death has lost its sting. Like protecting this life isn't actually the point anymore because the guy we follow, Jesus, let himself not just be killed, but brutally killed, humiliatingly killed. And he came back as something different, something greater, something we're still trying to understand. And so I think that's one thing that I've come to appreciate then is in all of the journeys God's taken me on and all that has happened, he is giving me the gift of understanding what true reality is, of understanding who he truly is. And the only way we get there, and this is why we often don't see it, is it actually does cost us everything. Because as long as we are still holding on to something of this world, we are not fully holding on to God.
Yeah.
And this is why Jesus said to his disciples, it's going to cost you everything. He says, hate your father, hate your mother. Jesus didn't actually condone hatred. He didn't actually not like family. But what he was saying is he was cutting to the deep. Even the most important things in your life, the things scripture commands you. It says, honor your father and mother. Even the core of everything, like, we have to be so willing to release and let go of everything but God so that we can actually completely hold on to God. And when we do that, that's when we get the passages like seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness and all these things will follow. That's the only
Yeah.
pathway there.
Yeah.
Jesus demonstrated it with his life, with his death, and invites us to do the same. And that's what I'm learning. When I've lost things, I could either choose to grumble about it, get mad at God about it, or I can choose to lean into the invitation to accept a better gift, an immeasurably more gift than I'm asking for, or imagining, and one that I might not fully grasp until I am in his presence. That it may still be hard for the rest of my life, but this life isn't going to seem like a thing compared to eternity. It's going to be a blip on the radar. And so I'm learning. I'm still learning, and I will continue to still learn what it looks like to accept God's invitation to accept the greater thing, to accept, as Jesus put it, not just life, but full life. He was offering full life to people who were alive. That's what it is a deeper understanding of what life actually is, what actually brings value, and how we can actually live today, on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your heart on it. So where did you see God? Is built around one of the most disarming questions a person can ask. What happened to people when they sit with the question? And what have you seen unlock in someone who keep with their God?
Yeah. It's funny. When I first started my podcast, it was with people that I knew because I was not yet doing it online.
Yeah.
I was not yet. I'm a part of something called Podmatch now that I can connect with. That's how we connected.
Yeah.
Connect with people around the world. But man, this first set of guests were people that I knew that I felt like God was saying, hey, invite this person to share their story. Because from the start, it was never about being a podcast. It was never the point of it. It was meant to be a space for authentic conversation where we invited God into it and see what he would do. We just happened to record it. And if the person was okay, could be made an episode. And many of those early guests had never been on a podcast, never recorded on a mic, and had absolutely no desire to do so. But they also felt the prompting. Sometimes they even reached out to me. I feel like God is telling me to tell my story, and I don't want to do it. What that space is meant to be is one in which we are honest, not just about that question, where did you see God, but honest about our positioning. Are we actually willing to look for God? Because oftentimes we don't want to because he's not showing up like we want him to. When it's a story of hardship, where we might even be mad at him because he's not answering our prayers. To actually be willing to position ourselves to say, what does it look like to believe that God actually is God? He is powerful, and he actually is good. He is loving, even in this situation where it seems the
Yeah.
opposite. And so what's been beautiful is to see when people are willing to reposition themselves, not just tell their default testimony, not just say good answers, but to be real and to sit with hard questions and to follow God's invitations to lean into a certain story or to share a certain thing. Something begins to open up in them because they begin to realize God actually is present and act. When God shows up in the conversation and at the end of it, we're like, whoa, what just happened there? Because that's not what we planned. That's not what we expected. Or the guest is like, I've never shared that story before. Gives us an opportunity to see that God shows up in even the small things like a
Yeah.
little conversation. And if he can show up in the little conversations, how much more so in the bigger ways? And so, for me, that question is important because it's a reminder of two things. One, the fact that the question exists is a reminder of how often we fail to look for God, to actually ask where he is, how prone we are to just live our lives and God's an afterthought if someone brings it up. That's the first thing. But two, that it is an invitation that if God actually is present and active, we have the opportunity to be blessed by seeing him today if we go into it proactive. If we go into it saying, I'm going to look for God, I'm going to listen for God. It's a very different way of living, and suddenly we experience life differently. So it's a rejection of the default way of living, and it's an embrace of this spirit-led way of living. And it's been a gift for me to be able to practice this through conversation after conversation on the podcast, but then also just in general life, to how can I engage every encounter with another with this same mentality?
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on it. So last, community is one of the three pillars of everything. What does it take to build a space where people with genuine different beliefs can explore hard questions together without it falling apart?
We definitely don't understand what community is. We think we do, but really it's just people gathered together is how we understand it. And the part we're not saying out loud is it's people like us gathered together,
Yeah.
whoever us is.
Yeah.
And there may be an openness to some flexibility there, but the thing we really don't want to be honest about is who is on the uninvited list, who it is we don't want in our spaces, who we believe can't be in our spaces. And this is something that Jesus threw out the window in every single story we see, because there are certain ways he was supposed to function, certain people he was supposed to encounter and engage with, certain people he wasn't supposed to. And he's constantly doing the opposite of that. He got rebuked for eating with sinners and tax collectors. He got called out by his disciples for sitting not just with a Samaritan, but with a Samaritan woman at a well where, he shouldn't even been at any of those spaces. Yeah. And he talked with Pharisees, and his disciples would get mad at him about doing that because they saw them as the enemy. And, all these things that he basically lived out a core reality that takes us all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, that God made us in his image. We are made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. And I think this is, if we really want to understand what true community is and have spaces that actually function as community, we have to understand this. And if we don't understand this, we are going to be incapable of community because we will continue to only invite certain people in and lock other people out. And what it means for us to be made in the image of God is, one, it means all of us are. And two, it means that because we're in God's image, we have this inherent value, this inherent purpose. A third thing is it means if we're made in the image of God, if God created us, that means he loves us. So that means everyone you encounter is loved by God. And so what does it mean then to engage with someone who is made in the image of God, who has value and purpose, who is loved by God? If we're honest, we fail to treat people like that well. There are certain people that we will not convey love to because we don't know how, or we feel like they don't deserve it. But what did Jesus say? He said, not just to love, but to love even your enemies. Yeah. Like that should be that we should have at least that one person on our list that we're allowed to hate is our enemies, the people that are actually persecuting us. And Jesus is like, no. When they persecute you, pray for them. So Jesus circumvented this idea of what people deserve. He said they deserve love, period, full stop. And let me demonstrate to you what it looks like to love others. And now you've seen me do it. John 13, he says, now you go and do likewise. And so that if we cannot understand the command, he says, I give you a new commandment, love one another. If we
Yeah.
can't understand that that is a command, it's not optional, then we are going to fail to actually have authentic community. And what we're going to create could actually be the opposite. It could actually cause division. And we see this around the world today. I'm seeing this in America a lot from people who identify as Christians. So much division, so much hatred coming from people who say they follow the God of love, the Jesus who embodied love.
Yeah.
Now, I will throw one important thing, because for some people, this could seem impossible, and it is. For us to actually live this out, it is impossible. We as humans, we can't do this. Our best efforts are going to fall short. And this is why Jesus said, I've sent a helper and an advocate, because he says what is impossible for man is possible
It's
for
possible.
God. And so if we actually want to have community, if we actually want to love others, we need to recognize our inability to do it and our need for the Spirit in order to do it. But it brings me back to what I said before. If you actually start going the way God invites you to go, his ways are not your ways. His thoughts are not your thoughts. It is going to look foolish. It's going to be costly. And so you're going to have to contend with, are you actually willing, as Jesus put it, to pay the cost? And so community isn't just this nice idea. Community is going to cost us, but man, oh man, what you get returned. It's like the story of the person when Jesus talked about the kingdom of God. And it's a person who is pursuing pearls, and there's this pearl of great worth that he sees, and he sells everything he has to buy this field to get this pearl. Seems foolish to us because we're like, what are you going to do with that now? You just sold your food, your livelihood, everything. Your family's probably mad at you, but he knew something about that we don't.
Yeah.
And God knows something about this full life of love, of community, unity that we don't. That it just seems like it's not worth the cost to us, but he's like, no, it absolutely is. We only get there if we start to lean into it, and we only are able to lean into it if we lean into the Spirit.
Yeah. We only get there when we lean into it, and we only get it when we lean into the Spirit. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your heart on this and your experience. This has really be amazing. So for my audience who love to reach out to you, either for the podcasting, the community, the things you do to follow on various media, how can they reach out and where is the best platform?
Yeah. As I shared, my true heart is not in podcasting and writing and any of these things, not even in self-promotion, but is to cultivate authentic, accessible space to process who God is, who he's made us to be, and what that means for today. And God's invited me to create that space in multiple forms, from sitting on a porch to recording a conversation to writing books to creating videos. And so all the content isn't about being content. It's about being a space for anyone who feels alone, feels misunderstood. And so my hope is to create more and more stuff to meet more and more people where they are, even if I never find out who they are. And you can find that at wheredidyousseegod.com. The podcast is streaming wherever you stream stuff. The books are on Amazon. But the core thing is I want you to know that you are not alone, that God sees you, but he's invited people like me, like you with your podcast, like others who are creating these spaces. So if you feel alone right now, know that God sees you and he is putting people in place to meet you where you are. The first step is just to lean into that, to lean into inviting the Spirit to show you where to step next, and then to take that step. If I could be one of those steps, then I'm grateful. If I am and I never find out, then I'm grateful because it's not about me.
Yeah.
But if there are ways that I could come alongside, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah. Amazing. Paul, thank you so much for the conversation. Yeah, as one as it is was such. Yeah, your story is a reminder that some of the most powerful transformation are not dramatic. They are the quiet daily work of releasing what we assume life owns us and learning to live fully inside what's actually. From decade of ministry without a map to book read, one honest chapter at a time, to a podcast built on belief that God show up in every conversation. Yeah, you're a pro that faithfulness does not require a perfect pitch. It requires showing up. That's really be genuine. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on the show.
Been great to be here. I appreciate it. I love it. It was life-giving.